Hey everyone, welcome to Motor Psychology from wherever you may be watching in the world. My name's Jonathan. If you're a new viewer, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing the final work on this lower right control arm of the C3 Corvette. I'm going to be pressing in new bushings, installing the cross shaft back in, putting in a brand new ball joint and a brand new control arm bumper. So that's what you can expect to see in this video. That will complete the work that I've done on this lower right control arm. So stick around and enjoy the video. Getting ready to press the bushings into this spot here. Before I do that, because of the paint, I'm just going to take that down slightly. I'm not going to get into any of the metal. I just want to take the paint off. The reason you want to remove the paint from this area is it's going to be such a tight space between the control arm and the bushing that any paint that got on there from the repaint, you need to take that off so that the bushing fits in properly. That should be good, just enough to take a little bit of the paint off. So you always want to start with the front side of the control arm, and that's the side that's got the stabilizer bar spot in there, right there. And that's the first one that you want to get in. That just makes it possible to get the shaft in. Also, to give this area some support, I'm going to tap in a couple of these guys. And that will prevent the control arm from getting compressed as well. So just putting that in there. Keep that thing open. I'm just going to try and carefully set this up. This is just me getting organized, setting up the pressing dies on the hydraulic press so that when I eventually get around to putting this bushing in, I'm all set up, aligned, and good to go. So what you see here is me just selecting the right pressing dies that I want to use and getting everything stacked so that I'm happy with the way that it looks and that I'm going to get this bushing pressed in at the right angle straight through the holes in the control arm, and that's what I'm looking for. Certainly a little bit of adjustment required here as I do this, and it's actually a lot heavier than it looks. So I'm holding up a fairly heavy control arm and trying to balance it as I get things lined up. Once I get a little bit of pressure on through the hydraulic press, I'm pretty much good to go. That's basically the setup. Now before doing this, I'm going to take that out and put the grease on it to help that slide in. And that should be good. This is the type of grease that I'm going to put on it. It came with the set of the bushings, so I'm going to use it. So I'm just putting a liberal amount of this grease on the outside of the new bushing, and once I'm done doing that, I'm going to put some grease on the inside of the control arm, and together I think it's going to be greased up enough that it will be ready for pushing into the control arm without any difficulties. And you see me just doing the inside of the leading edge of the control arm. Everything is greased up, I'm set up, and I'm ready to start pressing the bushing into the control arm. Okay, so I'm pressing it in, checking to make sure it's going in straight. Just doing little baby steps as I press this bushing into the control arm. So for me at this time, seems like there's a lot riding on it, so I want to make sure this bushing goes in straight and properly into the control arm. When it gets down to the second part of the control arm, I want to be careful, make sure it enters that part. So yeah, I'm just taking my time, pressing it in carefully and slowly, and as you can see, it is gradually making its way through the top part of the control arm and into the bottom section as well, and that is exactly what I'm looking for at this time. What we're looking at is this tiny space between here and here is decreasing with every pump. Okay, I got the poly bushing in as far as it's going to go. The next step is to put the cross shaft in. Okay, now that I have the bushing in, it's time to put this thing in. So, since this is the front, this part here that has the little indent will be what's bolted against the frame of the Corvette. So you want to make sure that is up, not this side, which is different. So that is the upside right here. And the reason why I didn't put the rear bushing in yet is this thing needs to go through here and then in here. So I'm just going to put some grease on this and then we'll do that. Definitely putting grease on the cross shaft and then into the bushing is important, because this is an area where there is going to be continual friction with the control arm as you drive the car. So any lubrication in there is going to reduce any potential squeaking. So I have seen some bushings that actually have grease nipples on them that just make it easier to maintain and to put some grease in between the cross shaft and the bushing at any later time in the future. So sticking this all the way through. That part will go into the bushing. There. So that is in the bushing. The next bushing is going to be pressed with this in place, so I have to make a jig for that to work. But it's getting there. I have to fabricate a rig or a jig that is going to allow me to press this bushing onto here through the control arm. So before I do that, I'm going to be using this pipe as my jig. But because this will be on the control arm, I won't be able to get this pipe on. So I'm going to cut a section so that I can slide this pipe on like that and then use it as my jig. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I just have to draw a line that is going to be at least that wide and then cut it out. So I'm going to give that a try. So I'll be cutting out this entire section here. and hopefully it'll work. So let's give that a try. Okay, so I'm gonna grind this off and see how that goes. So I've done so much grinding in my life that I put on the ear defenders so that I don't have to listen to the grinder noise so often. So I'm just using a cutoff wheel to get that off. I didn't really notice until after I reviewed this video footage that I was blasting sparks right into my camera. So I was lucky I didn't hit the lens right on, but I definitely pitted my camera to a certain degree through some of these sparks. But you gotta do what you gotta do. I don't know, it always surprises me working on these older cars. Doing something that you think is going to be pretty simple and straightforward always leads to looking for creative and innovative ways of getting your tasks done. So in this regard, I had to build this jig. So I thought about it for a while, and then I decided that this pipe idea would work fairly well. So with a little bit of home improvement on it, making it into the type of jig that I wanted, I think that I am pretty much good to go. Just completing up the final steps on it, and this little piece of metal is just gonna pop right out, and I think I've got the opening pretty much where I want it to be at this point. That's perfect and will work well for what I plan to use it for. So it's going to be a great little jig to get the bushing on the inner side of the control arm in. So when I have it set up on the press, and this is already in the control arm, I'll be able to push this jig in, and that's still going to hopefully have the integrity that I need to help press the bushing on. So the next step is going to be to actually press the bushing into the control arm. But for now, I'm happy I got this part. This little jig here, it costs about $5 at the Home Depot. It's just a piece of steel pipe, and should be good to go. Once again, for this side of the lower control arm, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just lightly, like very lightly, grinding off the paint that I sprayed inside these holes. So the idea is to get that down to the metal without removing any metal or making that space any wider. And there's also a tiny little lip on there that it's really useful to kind of shave that down a bit, and it really allows the bushing to be inserted in that area a little bit better than if that lip was still on there. Okay, I'm really working on filing down that lip a little bit so it doesn't get caught when I press the other bushing in. So as you can see, I'm just lightly shaving that lip off. That could catch the bushing as you put it in, and that's the reason why you want to just round it off a little bit or shave it off a tiny bit. Like, I mean a real tiny bit, that's all. Before I put this in, I'm put some more grease on here. I'm just doing a final greasing on the front end of that cross shaft before I put the rear bushing in and everything is in for its final time. It was definitely a little bit more of a complicated setup to put in the rear bushing, so you'll see that as I go through it. A little bit more complicated setup, but it's possible to do it, that's for sure. Okay, so I got that done. So I have this set up. Now I just have to get set up to put the bushing in. This is a little too long, so I'm going to cut it off around here. Alright, we got it cut off. Should be short enough now to fit in the press. Here we are back in the press trying to figure this out. It's definitely a handful for one person, so there's a lot of adjustment. Holding up the control arm is not necessarily the easiest thing because it weighs a lot, and it's a lot of patience to finally get things aligned and ready to go. Here's the bushing. I'm going to put some grease on the inside, and I think I'm going to do WD-40 on the outside to help press that in. So let's give that a shot. So I decided to try and use WD-40 for the outside of the bushing to put it in, as after the first one was put in, I really didn't see the purpose of putting the grease on the outside when all I really needed was a good lubricant to help the bushing slide into the control arm when I pressed it. There we go. Just going to cut this thing a little bit shorter. Again. Seemed to make sense to cut the other side off, and then I had a properly sized piece of pipe with no kind of threaded side on it, so it'll work better as a jig this way. So I basically cut both these ends off. That gives me a couple inches. Okay, time to get this set up. At this stage, I'm just setting up that jig that I made, and you can see how that is around the cross shaft, and I'm lining up the pressing dies so that everything will be in position, ready to go. Let's put a little bit of pressure down there so I can kind of get it aligned here. Just spraying on the non-aerosol version of WD-40, and I just want to make sure that everything is lubed up as well as possible to give it the greatest potential to be pressed in without any issues or problems. So that's my hope, and we'll see how things go. So you can see in this video how that jig that I made works. So it goes around the cross shaft, and in doing so also is in a position where pressure can be applied to that bottom section of the control arm, so that you have pressure on the bushing and pressure on the bottom side of the control arm, thereby allowing that bushing to be pressed in fairly successfully. So far so good. I'm just taking short, careful steps on the pressing, so I don't want to hammer this thing in really fast, but I'm taking very small incremental steps, making sure that the bushing is going in correctly, smoothly, and slowly, and then also checking the alignment as I press it in. I actually found the WD-40 a really good lubricant for pressing the bushings into that control arm, so I didn't have any issues with that. There we go, that's pressed in. This bushing pretty much pressed in as well as I could have expected, so it was pretty smooth going in, no main issues whatsoever, and the end results are perfect, so totally happy with that. Alright, so the jig worked fine, and as you can see the bearing, or as you can see the bushing is pressed in nicely, and it's nice and tight. The only thing is, I can't get it off, so I'm just going to take these off, and it's done. Most important thing is, put the bushings on, which is great. Alright, time to open some of the suspension stuff. What I've got here is entire front end suspension parts, tie rod ends, ball joints. This is one of the parts that I need right away, is the lower ball joint for the control arm. Looks great. Comes with all the fixtures. That'll be so nice to have that on. That's what I needed right there. It looks like it doesn't come with the hardware, but I'll find the original hardware and use that. That's what I needed. This and the ball joint. Well, this is a little annoying. So there's the original bumper. Fortunately, I have the parts. Here's the new one. Point to note, it doesn't come with the plate and it doesn't come with the hardware, so I'm going to have to grind this plate down and paint it, but it's doable and I'll get on with doing that right away. Fortunately, the ball joint has everything that I need. So have a look at this now, and then when I have it back, it'll be nicely redone. Just a little bit more grinding and cleaning, but I'm pretty happy with the way that this turned out, and it's totally reusable. So I'm going to paint it and then reinstall it. I did a couple coats of black semi-gloss paint on this to match the control arms and all the other things that I'm doing, and final result is pretty good. Let that dry. So what we have here is the lower control arm, bushing retaining bolts, and lock washers. So this will be good for both of them. So I decided not to use the original ones, and I'm going to put on some brand new ones. So we'll be able to do that. This is an identical set that I'll use for the upper control arms. These are new anchor bolts for the bumper. I think I'm going to put on the ball joint first, and I just have to find the hardware for that. There's the brand new ball joint. Looks pretty good. And all the hardware for that as well. Okay, finally time to put the ball joint and the rest of the stuff on the control arm. So we're going to start with the ball joint first, and it goes like this. The stem here will go up through the middle like this, and then the two side bolts will go in. This side bolt that looks like that is going to go on the leading edge. And this bolt is going to go on the trailing edge of it. And the idea is not to tighten them all the way. Now that the bolts for the ball joint are in, I just have to put in the nuts on them. So I'll do that now. Got to flip this over. They have a lock washer which goes on, and a nut. Better view here. Okay, I'm going to tighten it up with a number 13 here and a number 13 here. When I say tighten it up, I'm not really tightening it all the way up, but I'm just making it snug. Do the same for this one. Lock washer going on. And the nut going on. All right, that's snug enough for now. The next thing to do is to put the lock washer and the bolt on this part of the ball joint and tighten that up. This is going to be tightened to 20 to 30 foot-pounds of torque. So I'll set it up on my torque wrench to 20. I'm going to do 25, I think. That's it. Not too tight. We can flip it back over and then torque up these bolts. And the torque specifications for that are going to be between 14 and 19 foot-pounds. So I'm going to reset this thing here. Now I'm going to tighten up the inside bolts. I found out when I was doing this that this is a pretty tight area inside the control arm to fit my torque wrench. So I'm going to look for a smaller adapter that I can put on my torque wrench to get it to specifications. So for now, I just tightened it nice and firm with the ratchet, and we'll torque them to the final spec once I get the lower left control arm done. That's pretty tight. I'm going to torque it later. Let's do this one here. And I will torque that later to 15 to 19 torque. So this is what it looks like right now. You've got the new ball joint in there. This eventually is going to be put back on the C3, and it's going to be torqued down to 60 to 80 foot-pounds when that's done. So that is almost it for the ball joint. I've got a couple other things that I want to put in there so I don't lose it. I can put in the grease nipple here. That may or may not be the right one that I decide to keep, but I'll hold that for now. And so I don't lose it, I'm going to put the cotter pin in, but I'm just going to tape it in place. And that is the installation of the ball joint in the lower control arm, finally. So brand new ball joint. That will be great. And the boot. Now I'm just going to put the bumper on. So as you remember, that's the old bumper, and I'm going to grab the new one. There's the actual bumper right there. Let's open it up. There's the new bumper. Looks pretty good. It's black, painted. Side-by-side comparison. Pretty good. Pretty close. Now we'll move on to putting the bumper in. And this is the cleaned up bumper plate, which goes on top here, like that. I'm using new ones instead of the older ones, and these are 1/2 inch. The bumper sits on top of that plate. These guys go through. Tighten those up. Do the same to the other one here. Alright, so the bumper is on. The next, I'm going to be putting the washers on the end caps of the cross shaft. Let's do that. This bolt is a 5/8 bolt. So pretty simple, you just put that on like that and then put that through. What you don't need to do is to torque it or tighten it until you have it on the car. That way the suspension can settle, and once it's settled you can torque these up to the right spec. So we'll stick the other one on. Same thing. Perfect fit. So here we have the completed, restored, refurbished front control arm. So you've got the redone cross shaft, you've got the bushings in place, you've got the end caps, the bumper, and the ball joint installed. So this piece is going into my parts boxes until I'm ready to put it on the Corvette, which hopefully will be sooner than later. So that is a complete redo of that old rusty looking lower right C3 control arm. Ready, good to go, and ready for installation. Hey everyone, that completes the video on the restoration and refresh of that lower right control arm for the C3 Corvette. So this will end the series of videos for the entire lower right control arm. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something, and that you can see that it's not impossible to do, and you can take a little bit of work and a little bit of basic knowledge and restore these with new components on the old ones that existed. So you put in new bushings, new ball joint, and a new bumper, and you're good to go. So I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed this type of stuff and you find it useful, please give it a like, and we'll see you all in the next one, which is coming very, very soon. Thanks, y'all.